you know when your homeschool child is done with school, especially when you follow a less than traditional curriculum? In my homeschool binder, I have a scope and sequence from Abeka. Though I personally am not a fan of Abeka's curriculum, I do like their scope and sequence because the way that it basically breaks down what you should be learning year over year. So I look at that scope and sequence and go, how do we get this without having to sit with boring textbooks? The only one that I'm really rigid on is math, because I want to make sure that you have a good math foundation, both from mental math perspective and higher math perspective if you want to move on through college. The way that I do this is I have a basic college math textbook that you have to go through your last year in high school. Essentially, it's a synopsis of all of the 12 years of math that you've learned. Now, I use that because none of my kids are really going on into math-based careers. So in my opinion, if they're not going to be utilizing that much of higher math, why teach it? Like, there's better things to teach. I would rather teach the philosophy of math than work on, like, the higher level maths. And I think Life of Fred is really good at teaching the philosophy behind math. But I use teaching textbooks for real math. That's what we've always used. Now, I know not everybody who follows me is Christian. Abeka is a Christian curriculum, but the scope and sequence is not really faith-based. It's more knowledge-based. So I think you could get it to work for a secular perspective, but I'm sure there's secular curriculums that have their scope and sequences downloadable online. I've never noticed anything that's like super red flag Christian on it, but I also am a Christian, so it probably wouldn't pop out as weird to me. And I'm looking for two things when I look at that scope and sequence. One is, do I feel like they have gotten a good breadth of knowledge throughout their time that they've been educated at home? And two, do I feel like I've given them enough of a foundation that if they want to continue on in any of these subjects, they'll have the foundation needed in order to move on? Now, I'm able to do that a little more loosely because of the state that I homeschool in. Other states are more rigid about the different subjects that you have to have and the credits that you need. But in Florida, I fill out the transcript and I fill out their diploma. Now, I fill out the transcript different than I would if I was in like a traditional school setting because I don't aggregate all of their grades for a year. Personally, I look at grades as showing you what you need to be better at. So let's say if you're in traditional school and you get a 76 on a test, they just make you go on to the next test. I would give you that test back and go figure out what that other 24% is that you didn't learn. And then you would come back and you'd be able to get 100 on that test the next time you take it. I don't like the idea of just moving on from bad grades because I don't think that's giving you an actual foundation. I think it's leaving cracks in your foundation. Like, it just seems weird to me to be like, oh, you're not really good at that. Let's move on to the next subject. Like, imagine that in like a physical therapy situation where you're learning to re-walk. Well, it looks like you're not bearing weight really well, so let's practice running. Like, no, work on bearing weight until you can bear weight and then learn to walk. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me to move on when you know there's a deficit. So basically what I do is I step back at the end of the year and I look at the overall amount that they learned. Like, were they really able to master it? Is this just not their subject? Like, I have some kids where history is just not it. If some kids where science is just not it. So they're gonna forever be a B student in that because it's not their jam. And so that's how I assign their grades for their transcripts. So basically when you figure out they've had this whole breadth of education and they're ready to move on, that's when you graduate them.